With an ever-evolving threat and the tyranny of geography, the Indo-Pacific region presents numerous challenges for our Army. Our incoming speaker, General Flynn, will highlight how USARPAC is addressing those challenges while sustaining readiness. General Flynn has a vast amount of experience, particularly with light and airborne formations, and has served numerous command and staff positions over his 37-year career. Throughout his career, General Flynn has conducted operational and combat deployments around the world to include Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Haiti, Afghanistan, and Iraq. He currently serves as the Commanding General of the United States Army Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce General Charles Flynn, who is joining us online this afternoon. Sir.
Hey, thanks for the introduction, and I appreciate you having me here today. Can you hear and see me? You can just give me a heads up.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. All right, let me start by saying that, and I look forward to your questions. I guess I'll open by saying I'll walk you around the region and give you my perspective on the threats and the what's actually happening in the region. And then I'll talk about the three ways that U.S. Army of the Pacific is executing our operation out here. But before I do that, let me just explain a couple of background and some contextual points I think that'll be important. And I know some of this will also be covered on day 3 when Mr. Ian Sullivan, the TRADOC P2, goes into a China deep dive. First of all, this century is going to be defined by what actually happens in the Indo-Pacific and in Asia. It is the most consequential region at the most consequential time, and it has the most consequential adversary that has both the capability and the will, and it demonstrates it each and every day to conduct operations to counter the United States and what a free and open Indo-Pacific represents for the world. Secondly, the year is 2023. By 2033, I believe that something is going to have to be decided by President Xi. He's 70 years old, and generally by the time he's 80, he's going to have to make a decision about what to do with the modernization, with the reorganization, and with the military instrument that he has built and is building. He has stated it publicly. He's basically told his commanders to be ready by 2027. But the fact of the matter is, I point this out to all of you in that audience there because I want you to think about where you're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. The jobs that you're going to be in, the roles that you're going to perform, and what that means to you, to the Army, and to the country. Because this is an area that we don't understand. The Army has ceded its understanding of its history out here. We're not familiar with the region. We're not familiar with the culture. We're not familiar with the place. We're not familiar with the adversary. And we're not familiar with the adversary's capabilities. So this is a call to action on the part of the Army to understand what is actually happening in Northeast Asia, in Southeast Asia, in Central Asia, in Oceania, in places where the plates of Melanesia, Polynesia, and Micronesia come together, where the Arctic touches the Asian continent. And then there's this archipelago bridge that connects the Asian continent to the Australian continent. This is a massive piece of the planet. 6 out of 10 people in the world live here today, and in the next 10 to 15 years, 7 out of 10 people on this planet are going to live in this region. So the stakes of understanding what's actually happening out here is really important for everyone in the audience. And the Army, the linchpin of the Joint Force, the backbone of the Joint Force, plays an enormously important role out here. This is not, and I've said this 1,000 times, this is not an air and maritime theater. This is a joint theater. It's got joint challenges, and it's going to be solved by applying joint solutions. And the Army is an enormously important element of the joint force because of the interdependencies of the joint force. In fact, our joint doctrine points out that if any one element of the joint force is not successful, then the entire joint force will fail. And that's based largely upon the interdependencies of land, air, sea, space, and cyber. So with that as a little backdrop, now we're going to go to the slides, and it's a series of builds. I'll talk about the subregions within the region, and then I'll talk about the three ways that the U.S. Army of the Pacific is countering the adversaries out here in this region. First build. What you should see is an ellipse coming up in what I'll refer to as South Asia. This is the soft land underbelly of China. These routes are road and ground locks that have been cut by China over the last number of years. One of them actually is through Central Asia. That was once a 4-month trip. It is now a 4-week trip. There's the Pakistan-China economic corridor that runs out to the port of Gwadar. And you have the operations along the line of actual control between China and India. Then you have the Chinese economic corridor that is being cut through the country of Myanmar out to the port of Rangoon. Then you have a port facility in Sri Lanka, and then you have some construction going on a port and airfield in what's called the Cocoa Islands, which sits in the Ottoman Sea. The slide that I see in front of me right now actually has 4 ellipses. This was supposed to be a build, but I'll walk you through it since it's up all together. But I want you to focus on the ellipse on the farthest left side of the screen. In the central ellipse, which basically runs from Thailand all the way out to the international border between Papua New Guinea and Indonesia. That blue represents the Mekong River. And then north on the Mekong River is a series of dams that the Chinese have put in. They've doubled the amount of dams in the last 3 years than they did in the previous 5. Why? To control water. Water out of the Mekong River is life. It's power, food, it's water. It's nearly everything in Southeast Asia. You see the dotted lines around areas in the South China Sea. Those are obviously locations that have been built up over the last 10 to 15 years by Chinese. Still here? Okay. And then if you jump all the way out to Oceania, I'll just go to the ellipse out in Oceania. That basically goes from the international border between Indonesia and Papua New Guinea all the way out beyond Tonga and Fiji. What those represent out there are natural disasters. Those small island countries care about being able to recover from a natural disaster. And what's represented there in the red is a series of corruptive investments by the part of the Chinese. They get involved in a corrupt arrangement with a business leader, a military leader, a police leader, a political leader, and we cannot get them untangled because what they do is these small island countries can't pay back the loan, and then they take terrain. They take airfields, they take ports, they get into their IT backbone and their electrical grid, and it gets very, very difficult to untangle them. Again, this is an area often referred to as the Blue Pacific or Oceania. It's where Polynesia, Melanesia, and Micronesia come together. I often refer to it as the doorstep to the United States because the ellipse just to the north of that is the homeland. You see the 8 islands of the Hawaiian island chain, and then they go all the way out to the second island chain, which is out where Guam is, and just north of that is the Northern Marianas. Guam, Tinian, Saipan, and Rota represented there, and of course within there is actually 13 locations and territories that represent the U.S. homeland that we are required to defend. There's a circle up in the north that representing the Arctic Circle, and I often refer to the Russians are inside the Arctic Circle looking out, the Chinese are outside the Arctic Circle looking in, and then of course the United States sort of seems to have a foot on each side of the circle, committed in some respects but not fully. And that has a lot to do with the transit routes over the top of Mother Earth. If you could cut your transit times by 18 to 21 days, you just opened up an enormous amount of markets for your economy, which the Russians and the Chinese are partnering today to try to work together in that area. In the northern part of the map, you see the Eastern Army Military District. The Eastern Army Military District of the Russian Army was a force that basically went to Belarus, went into Kiev, got their clocks cleaned, and has repositioned around to the east. But the bigger point here is that Putin is harvesting a lot of his platforms, a lot of his people, a lot of his ammunition and stores, which are large, out in the east. And he's accessing that to feed his war machine in the Ukraine. The other lines represented on the map there are gas and oil pipelines and some coal routes that go between China, Russia and China. And again, they represent alternatives to fuel, access to fuel, and access to food, two things that President Xi needs as the second largest country in the world. And of course, what does Putin need? He needs money. President Xi has that. So there's no limits relationship that they refer to. I take them for what they say it is. And then I'll quickly jump down into the ellipse that represents Northeast Asia. And of course, this has the Northern Theater Command, the Central Theater Command, the Eastern Theater Command, and the Southern Theater Command of the Communist Chinese Party and the People's Republic of China. And then, of course, it's military, the PLA. And you can see the Eastern Theater Command is right there and is the main effort, if you will, for any attack on Taiwan. The Southern Theater Command would be a supporting theater command if, in fact, the Eastern Theater Command would conduct operations. The Central Theater Command has assets in it available that would support the Eastern Theater Command. And then, of course, the Northern Theater Command is to protect the northern flank. We already talked about what the Western Theater Command is doing along a line of actual control, which represents not just India, but it's also where Pakistan, Central Asia, Bhutan, Nepal, Myanmar, all the way down to Vietnam, share borders with China. A couple of points I'm going to make here that I think are important for everyone to understand. First of all, the Chinese have three things that we do not have. The first thing is they are operating on interior lines. They are right there. So the distance between the Chinese coast and Taiwan is 100 miles. From where I'm sitting today on Oahu to the Pohakaloa training area on the Big Islands, that is basically 130 to 140 miles. So it's actually closer than our biggest training area out here in Hawaii. So they have interior lines. The second thing they have is mass. They have a lot of people in ranks. And it doesn't matter what service, but they have the largest army in the world. And then the third thing that they have is they have magazine depth. They have a lot of quivers and a lot of weapons. So those three things are things that I pay attention to every day. I pay attention to the military instrument that they have created because that's our job. We have to be able to count that military instrument that they have created. The second point I want to make about the Chinese military, and this is an important point because it's about how we counter what they have created. So what they have created, this A2AD arsenal that they have created, is primarily designed to defeat maritime and air power, two substantial strengths of the United States military. It is secondarily designed to degrade, deny, and disrupt space and cyber. Notice, however, it is not designed to find, fix, and finish distributed, mobile, lethal, non-lethal, reloadable, fixed, and semi-fixed land power, armies. When I say land power, I mean the Army, I mean the Marine Corps, I mean Special Operations Forces, and I mean these large armies that represent region. So, in effect, what represent by being forward in this region and creating our own interior lines, and I'll come back to that in a minute, is we have created a targeting dilemma for the PRC. We present them something that they did not calculate into their A2AD arsenal, and it is formidable, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. I'll pause there, and I'm going to describe to you the three things that we are doing, the three ways that we are supporting the National Defense Strategy, and the ways that we are supporting the Indo-PACOM theater campaign plan here in the Indo-Pacific. Next build. Okay, so three parts to this. I'm going to start on the left side. JPMRC represents the Joint Pacific Multinational Readiness Center. It is the first training site the U.S. Army has built in nearly 50 years, and it is in the Pacific. It is the Army's contribution to an acronym called PMTEC, PMTEC. That is the Pacific Multinational Testing and Experimentation Capability. It's long been on the integrated priority list out here in the Indo-Pacific since Admiral Locke was the combatant commander, and I was a two-star in the 25th Division. JPMRC has a campus in Hawaii, and it has a campus in Alaska. In Hawaii, the environment and the conditions of 8 island archipelago jungle surrounded by joint assets looks exactly like Southeast Asia. If you go to the Yukon and the Donley training area in Alaska, high altitude, extreme cold weather, mountainous, it looks exactly like a number of locations in the region, from the Himalayas to the island of Hokkaido, to the Aleutians, to Korea, to Mongolia, and I could go on. The fact of the matter is we have 2 campuses, one in Alaska, one in Hawaii, where we are training at the brigade combat team level, supported by divisions and other enablers. We are surrounded by the joint force in both Alaska and Hawaii, and we are conducting joint training with our multinational partners, and we are generating readiness in the region. And then that first way that we are supporting the National Defense Strategy is the Joint Pacific Multinational Readiness Center, and we are taking that generated readiness and we are applying it into the region through Operation Pathways. Operation Pathways is our operational design for campaigning in the region. Operation Pathways represents the more than 40 joint and Army-to-Army exercises that we do in the region every year. Operation Pathways is adversary focused and it is O-plan informed. So we are conducting operations using the exercises as the label by which we operate in the region. We're applying that readiness generated at JPMRC in the region, and we're putting it into locations, key terrain, and we're primarily doing 3 things while we're out operating on Operation Pathways. The first thing that we're doing is we're increasing and improving the joint force and the joint readiness of our force by operating with our joint partners. The second thing that we're doing is we're increasing the interoperability with our allies and partners in the region, and we are increasing their confidence in us and us in them. And then the third thing that we're doing is we are denying key terrain, both human and physical terrain, from the PRC and the PLA as they operate in the region, in all of those ellipses that I talked about earlier. Because this is about being able to enable our allies and partners to defend their national sovereignty and their territorial integrity, because that's effectively what's being violated. And then the third way that we're supporting the national defense strategy is the creation of joint interior lines. Much like I described what the Chinese have operating on their interior lines, what we're trying to create is joint interior lines from the northernmost reaches of Japan and the island of Hokkaido, down through the Southwest Islands, down through the 7.5 islands of the Philippines, effectively using the first island chain. We already have locations, of course, on the second island chain with Guam, represented by that dotted blue circle in the middle, and then in a fish hook-like fashion, around through Southeast Asia, up back onto the Asian continent in the vicinity of Thailand. Of course, not represented there is the nearly 30,000 if you put a circle around South Korea, of which we already have a foothold on the Asian continent in South Korea with USFK and 8th Field Army. The primary assets that we seek to place on the interior lines are really fourfold. It is command and control, it is collection, it is protection, and it is sustainment. Those four warfighting functions, if you go through collection as intelligence, those four warfighting functions are absolutely critical to creating staying power, to creating operational endurance. The joint interior lines are forward in order to deter our adversaries from acting. And if deterrence were to fail, then we are in a position to counter any actions that our adversaries would take. Again, back to what I mentioned earlier, their A2AD arsenal is primarily designed to defeat air and maritime power, secondarily space and cyber. It is not designed to find, fix, and finish distributed, mobile, lethal, fixed, semi-fixed, mesh networked, and reloadable land power. So that position of joint interior lines must be built over time, and we have to create that operational endurance and that staying power forward with combat credible forces, because there is nothing like hard power. There's nothing better than hard power that deters. And what the U.S. Army provides is land power, and that is represented in hard power that's forward. Okay, I think I'll end by just saying there's, and I know this is, maybe a little bit above your level, but I'm going to bring it down to, the tactical applications of it for the folks that are in the audience there at the Captain's Career Course. First of all, there's three pillars of the National Defense Strategy. First is campaigning. Second is integrated deterrence. The third is build enduring advantage. Those three pillars of the National Defense Strategy, the three ways that we're supporting those three pillars, and the combatant commanders theater campaign plan, the three ways that we're supporting those three pillars are those three things right there. Every day in this theater army, all we focus on are those three things. Training at JPMRC to generate readiness. Then we take that readiness and we apply it in the region through Operation Pathways. And then through the application of that readiness, we are building interior lines. So the combination of integrated deterrence, campaigning, and build enduring advantage is represented in those three ways right there. We're doing all this with the forces that we have assigned to this theater army And we seek ways to bring more of the Army here because we need the Army focused on this problem. Again, we need to understand the place, we need to understand the adversary, and we need to understand the adversary's capabilities. And we can't get there fast enough, ladies and gentlemen. We have to understand what's at stake out here. I'll pause there. I look forward to your questions. And again, thanks for asking me to do this. Over.
For your comments, sir. Sir, what we'll do now is we'll transition. I know we had the board up there talking the reference to the application where you can send your questions in. But what I'll do is start our initial opening from the application. And the first question looks as undeniably there has been a lot of attention on the conflict in Ukraine. How do you think Ukraine has changed the way the region sees conflict? And does it impact or change our attitudes towards it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, I think that both the region, well, three parts really. The region has seen what has happened in Europe and the Ukraine. China is watching what's happening in Ukraine, and of course, Taiwan is also watching and understanding more what's happening in the Ukraine. There are a lot of things we could cover in this. I think that obviously creating operational endurance and sustainment is a strength that the U.S. Army and the U.S. force has. You also saw that play out in with the Russian Army in the early phases of this operation where that faltered. I think the second thing is leadership and training. Both of those matter day to day, and our leader development, our training, and the way we train every day and how we train is incredibly important. And it builds skill proficiency at every echelon. And this is a strength of the U.S. Army, but it's also something that we need to pay particular attention to every day. It's not something that we can take for granted. And then the last thing I'd say, at least out here in this region, is that be confident that our weapons work, because they do. And that may not be the case for some other forces that have been applying their weapon systems out there. Last thing I'd say is that I think another point I'd make is that the aggressive behavior, and I'll call it, because I've said this publicly a number of times, it's actually the irresponsible behavior of the PRC and the PLA in every domain. That irresponsible behavior the region is witnessing out here, and they don't like what they see. And I think that this is an advantage of the way we in the U.S. operate out here, because our values and our principles, that is our currency. That's our greatest currency. And others' currency is corruption and irresponsible behavior. And that is resonating out here, because that overly aggressive and irresponsible acts is something that we have all seen, witnessed in Europe by the Russians, and some of those activities have occurred out here. Fortunately, we've not had a mishap or a war breakout. But again, if you continue to act that way, there is always a chance that something like that could happen, and we would not want that to occur. But thanks for the question.
Okay, we'll move over to the microphones. Microphone 1.
Hello, sir. Captain Brown, MCCC. If the ground war was to break out tomorrow with China and or North Korea, what would your greatest concerns be in terms of capability gaps? And then additionally, if you were able to talk to every brigade commander in the entire Army, what would you beg them to do differently so that they could be successful in your theater?
On the first part of your question, when you say ground war, I think it would just be a war, and it would have a ground component to it. And I think the gap, or the capability that gives me sort of the greatest bit of cause, or a greatest bit of caution or pause, is that interior lines. We have to take the time to build those out now, and it's going to take time to create those conditions. And we need to do that with the allies and partners in the region. And so this goes to the answer, I guess, of the second one to all brigade commanders. I would tell you that at the brigade level, your ability to task organize to solve problems inside of your brigade, or as you're talking and coordinating and planning and synchronizing with division commanders or joint task forces, your ability to task organize to solve problems at the brigade level is absolutely imperative. So training of the company battery troops, of course, a brigade commander, that is a solemn responsibility, but their ability at the brigade combat team level, and really any brigade level, to be able to task organize to solve the problems, to have the agility in planning, coordinating, and synchronizing at the brigade level, to be able to do that is critical. So those two things would be my the areas that I guess that the first one that gives me a little bit of caution or pause right now, because I think we're behind and we need to catch up. And then on the brigade commanders, they can't do enough to build skilled proficiency at the company battery troop level for training, but also be able to quickly take their staff and their command and be able to task organize with any number of capabilities to be able to solve the problem that they're confronted with, or that their higher headquarters is asking them to solve. Over.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we've got microphone 2. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, sir. My name is Second Lieutenant Myers. Earlier you mentioned how hard it was for countries to untangle themselves from Chinese investment. My question would be, what efforts or strategies has the U.S. taken to combat China's use of debt trap diplomacy and power projection in the region?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is, Operation Pathways is our way of campaigning in the region. It's, as I said, it's taken the more than 40 exercises that we have as, that are either joint or Army to Army. And it is a series of tactical actions out there that are solving operational and strategic challenges. And so the ellipse that's out in Oceania, or the one in Southeast Asia, or the one in South Asia, I mean, I think that everything that we're doing out here is a way for us to counter what the Chinese are doing. I'll answer the question really by saying the following. One thing that is often overlooked out here, and I'll go through a couple of numbers here so you get an appreciation for it. 65% of the Japanese military is Army. 70% of the Philippine military is Army. 70% of the Indonesian military is Army. Thailand, 75% of the military is Army. India, 80% of its military is Army. These are nations with large armies. The Philippine Army has 12 divisions. It has 11 light divisions and an armor division. And the point I'm making is the security architecture that actually binds this region together are armies. is land power. And even though the map shows a lot of water and a lot of air, the reality of it is on the ground, which is where their territorial integrity and their national sovereignty is being violated, the greatest counterweight that we have to China is this network of allies and partners that represents the security architecture that binds this region together, and that's best represented on the ground by land power and the land power network. So the point I'm making is that our greatest counterweight to their corrosive, irresponsible, and aggressive behavior is to bring the network of allies and partners together. And it's best brought together in the villages, in the towns, in the training areas, at the ports, in the airfields, in all of the domains by armies. Because the armies represent institutions inside of each of these countries that are going to secure their borders. They're going to secure their territorial integrity and protect it, and their national sovereignty. I'll give you one example. The Philippine military has 12 divisions. The Philippine Army has largely been focused in the south, in the 7,500 islands that represent the Philippine nation in the archipelago amidst Southeast Asia. Focused in the south, largely focused on counterinsurgency. Now they're trying to take 12 Army divisions, reorganize them so that they can distribute them across the 7,500 islands, have forces on the land that can dominate in the air littoral, in the maritime littoral, from the land. And who do they look to help them with that? They look to the U.S. Army. They look to the U.S. military. And they look to us out here in this region to help them be able to do things like multi-domain operations, to bring common operating pictures together, to integrate fires, to plan, synchronize, and coordinate everything from day-to-day campaigning activities to crisis response to something worse. And so I think that is the great value that land forces and the U.S. Army provides out here in this region. Over.
Okay, sir, I'm going to transition to a question on the app here. Which Army modernizations efforts excite you the most, and where do you see the gaps in our current modernization?
Well, there's a few things that, I mean, let me, I guess I'm going to maybe take this question in a different direction. So there's been, and I know General Rainey's there and a number of other senior leaders. I know there's a lot. You still got me? Yeah. I know we can pay a lot of attention to, I'll just refer to it as the bent metal outputs of modernization. You know, a hypersonic battery, a prism battery, an LTAMS radar. Pick a new material solution that we do not have in our formation yet, but they're coming. And there's a number of them. There's certainly more than 30. But I would argue that some of the most transformative work that we're doing in the Army today has nothing to do with the bent metal hardware that's coming. It has everything to do with the organizational changes that are occurring. Let me give you a couple of examples. The 3 multi-domain task forces that we have, the Security Force Assistance Brigade, the Theater Fires Element, the Theater Information Advantage Directorate, and I could go on and on. There's other organizational adjustments that are occurring And yet, when we talk about modernization, we go immediately to the material solutions. And I think one of the most compelling stories and one of the most important stories that's going on in the Army today is the fact that the multi-domain task force, the organization, all three of them, in fact, but it was led by the first multi-domain task force at Joint Base Lewis McChord, which really stood up in 19. So here it is, 23. It's 4 years in the making, and it has already worked through all of the human, technical, and procedural interoperability for the joint force. That was an organizational change that came out of a concept and then was part of our new doctrine. And that organization is in front of the bent metal, the new hardware, whatever that weapon system is. And the important part here is that the organization was actually in front of the material solution. Now, let's think about the reverse of that. Think about a new material solution like a hypersonic weapon system or a Tomahawk or a Prism, or pick any one of the ones that we have out there, and we give it to a legacy formation. I would argue, and I could say this with credibility, having been out here, I would argue that that legacy organization would not know how to operate, integrate, synchronize, and coordinate that new weapon system with the joint force. Period. Full stop. That is inarguable from my point. The point I'm making is these new organizations, in my view, is the area that all of the leaders in there, we should be looking for organizational adjustments that are going to transform the Army. Because it will not just be the bent metal. It will not be the new hardware. It'll not be the new software. It'll be the new organizational wear that we design and that we creatively and innovatively think our way through. And that has to happen in training. It's got to happen on exercises, and it's got to happen while we're experimenting. And on that point, I think I tell my team out here all the time, every exercise has to have an experiment, and every experiment has to have an exercise. They are hand in glove. So I may have taken the answer of that question in a different direction, because you might have wanted me to rattle off, my top 10 of the new systems that we have coming on. But the reality of it, in my view, the organizational changes that are happening in the Army, they're not often talked about, but in my opinion, those are the most transformative things that we're doing, because again, in my opinion, the essence of transformation is change, and organizations have to change. Thanks.
Sir, thank you for that response. I'm going to move towards the app again. We've got I'll call it a variety of questions that focus around the same topic, so I'm going to try to formulate it here. I think it's really specifically in terms of ground forces. Where do you see the role for armored forces in the Pacific region as you think through those potential contingencies and potential for conflict?
Well, the Taiwan Army has M1 tanks, so much like the tank is being used over in Europe, that force is going to need to be able to train. I would also tell you that, for many of you that are not aware, we just conducted a large operation down in Australia, 30,000, 15 nations, with armor capabilities from the Australian Army. We then, after Talisman Sabre in Australia, put those tanks on Army watercraft and brought them up to Garuda Shield in Indonesia, which is a country that has 17,500 islands. And I guess the point I'd make is that, and we get this often out here, if you're going to be able to conduct combined arms ground maneuver, then you're going to require a combined arms team. And the tank and armor is an essential part of that. There is a reason why Taiwan bought tanks a number of years ago, just like they bought Apaches, because combined arms, air, ground, close combat in restrictive terrain requires armor forces. It's also a reason why the Philippine Army has an armor division. And if you're aware of what happened in Mindanao and in the battles down in southern Philippines, their armor capabilities were decisive in rooting out in close proximity using combined arms formations, particularly in places like Marwar, where they had engineers and dozers and where they had tanks that were operating in restricted terrain. So armor forces and tanks in this region are going to absolutely be necessary. There's a reason why we keep tanks in Korea. There's a reason why we have strikers in Korea. There's a reason why Thailand recently purchased a striker brigade worth of equipment with 144 strikers in one of their regiments. So the fact of the matter is, we're going to need heavy forces, we're going to need motorized infantry forces, and we're going to need light forces out here, and we're going to need the combined arms ground maneuver to close with and destroy. And you're also going to have that close-in air-ground coordination for those forces to operate. So I think it was General McConnell said, if you want to win, you're going to have tanks. And I agree. And if you're going to operate in restricted terrain, you're going to need tanks. And we got plenty of restricted terrain out here. Over.
Sir, thank you. I will transition to more of a regional question. And it's really, how do you see us building relationships with India, given their status as a populated country with a significant landmass?
Yeah. So recently, first of all, I'm getting ready to leave to go to India. In fact, the Vice Chief General George his first visit into the region is going to be at this conference that we're going to run in New Delhi in India, the Indo-Pacific Army Chiefs Conference. So I guess what I would describe is that in the last couple of years, in this most recent assignment of mine, I've seen a pretty substantial change in the relationship between the Indian Army and the U.S. Army. We have an exercise called UWAS, and the Indian Army last year, we operated up in the Himalayas at about 8,000 to 9,000 feet. They are interested in a number of platforms that we have, everything from counter UAS to unmanned systems, to tubed artillery, to extended range munitions, to mobile artillery, to attack aviation, medium and heavy lift, and everything in between. And so I'm very encouraged at the exercising, the complexity, the scale that the Indian Army has asked to continue to operate with us. They have also sent observers to exercises that they previously had not. They had observers in Australia this year for Talisman Sabre. They had observers last year in Super Garuda Shield in Indonesia. And so, again, I think that our Army to Army relationships have really grown in the past couple of years. I think that is healthy, and I'm excited to see where that's going to go into the future. Just for some of you may or may not be aware, back in the 20 timeframe, they asked for a rapid delivery of some extreme cold weather gear, individual sets with the IQWICs, and then the small unit sets, and the U.S. Army was able to deliver those in 365 days. We delivered 2 sets, and that delivery of some extreme cold weather gear on a rapid ask, I'll say, demonstrated to the Indians that they could partner and rely on us, and that kind of trust goes a long way in being able to create strategic advantages for the region and for the United States and for India. Thanks for the question.
Okay, sir, I think we've got time for one more question. I'm going to transition to, in terms of operation pathways, what do you feel should be emphasized the most to commanders in order to successfully prepare for a rotation or deployment to your area of responsibility?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think, knowing the area that you're going to be in, what part of the region are you going to be in, whether it's in South Asia or Southeast Asia or out in Oceania, or potentially in multiple countries along the First Island chain and even on the Asian continent. Knowing the area you're going to be operating in and the armies and the forces that you're going to have task organized with you to operate there is vitally important. I guess the other point I'd make is that knowing sort of more broadly what is the objective that we're seeking as a result of that particular part of Operation Pathways. Because again, even though it may be one exercise, there's a series of rehearsals that are going on in that exercise. We're exercising land forces, we're exercising joint forces, we're exercising multinational forces, and then the experiments that are woven into each one of those forms of rehearsal are really important. So I think for brigade and battalion, really commanders at every level, to understand what is the terminal training objectives that we seek, what are the outcomes we seek at the end of that, and being able to know that a couple of levels up is really important for battalion commanders, brigade commanders, division commanders, and all the way up to the theater army, because there are parts of these operations that have to go on that have strategic outcomes that we seek. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna end on one final comment. Do you have any other questions there, or can I kind of come back to something in the beginning?
No, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think I just end by saying, like, I think that, General George, acting, in his capacity as the Vice Chief of Staff in the Army, but I mean, I think his focus on warfighting, delivering ready combat power, continuous transformation, and strengthening the profession. I mean, I think those 4 things, we need to all be talking about them with every breath we take. I mean, we cannot talk enough about warfighting and training. We cannot talk enough about delivering ready combat power forward in the regions against the adversaries, focused on the adversaries, focused on our O plans. The transformation, the continuous transformation that has to go on in the Army. Things are moving too rapidly with the adversary. Things are changing so fast in the operational environment that we have to keep pace with that, and we have to do that through continuous transformations, almost like the organizational changes I was talking about earlier. And I, in my view, all of that will strengthen the profession of arms, because it will be about war fighting. It will be about delivering combat ready forces. It will be about transformation. And I'd sum it up by, like, all of the leaders in there, you have to create identity, purpose, and mission in every one of your organizations. Individual identity, an identity of that individual inside your organization, inside your formation, and the capability that he or she brings. Purpose. What is the purpose for what we're doing every day? Why are we doing what we're doing? Why is that combat readiness important? Why is that transformation important? Why is that warfighting skill important? Purpose. We have to give everyone and every formation purpose. And then mission. What is your mission? What is it you're getting ready to do? What must you be ready to do as an individual, as a leader, as a commander, as a formation? So I can't impress upon all of you enough to think through warfighting, delivering combat ready forces, continuous transformation, and strengthening profession. But at the individual level, at the very individual level, I think we have to get out there and make sure that we are providing identity, purpose, and mission to every one of our formations. And I think that recipe is a way where we will strengthen the profession, be able to transform, be able to deliver combat ready forces, and increase our skill proficiency at echelon in warfighting. So thanks very much for the opportunity to talk here today. I know I'm probably at the end of the day, and I just appreciate the ability to talk about the challenge that we have out here in the Indo-Pacific. Thanks.